When this woman entered the local metro line from work to home, she had no idea that her life would change forever. It was just a simple trip from A to B. But this particular trip would turn into a nightmare in a hurry, and it all had to do with a man on board who couldn't stop staring at her. And when she found out why, tears were streaming down her face. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. It started out as just a typical day for the 38-year-old Becky. She was done with her shift at work and entered the metro station. The platform where the public transport vehicles zoomed past was a familiar sight for Becky. Becky stepped into the crowded metro, unaware of what was about to happen. The metro was packed with people like it usually was this time of the day. Becky didn't mind though. She just stood in the far corner of the train carriage and minded her own business. That was what most people did on the metro anyway. It was a short-haired, middle-aged man. He looked ordinary. Just the kind of man who would blend into a crowd of people. Except that, this man kept staring in Becky's direction. At first, Becky figured that he must have been looking at something behind her. But when she followed his gaze, there was no one there. That's when she realized that he was staring at her. Becky gave the man an uncomfortable smile in return. With that smile, Becky hoped he would realize she had noticed him so he could stop his invasive stare. But that action, unfortunately, did not give her the desired result. The strange man just kept staring at her without blinking once. It made Becky feel extremely uncomfortable. When Becky arrived at her stop, he appeared to be gone. But on her way home, Becky constantly felt that eyes were upon her. It was like someone was constantly watching, no matter how many streets she walked down. It got so bad that the next day when Becky needed to return to work, she dreaded the metro trip there. And rightfully so, because the moment she entered the train, the same man was there again. What did he want from her? It was unnerving. That's why when Becky finally arrived at work, she was ecstatic, because this controlled environment felt safe. Becky got on with her day fine after that. She helped people with their problems, and when doing so, Becky hoped that this day would never end. That, unfortunately, was not the case. The hours seemed to fly by, and before Becky knew it, her shift had ended, and that meant that the safety net provided by her work did too. Becky needed to go home, which meant another metro trip. Becky stayed as long as she could, and when she eventually mustered enough courage, she left the building. She made her way over to the metro station as quickly as possible, hoping not to encounter the same man again. But the moment Becky entered the metro, she saw him again. He was standing at the same spot he was in yesterday and that morning, and his eyes were instantly fixated on her. Becky ignored him as much as she could, but this time was different. Because when the metro reached her final stop, he wasn't gone from her line of sight. No, quite the opposite. When Becky left the metro, he did so too, which added a new level of tension to her already stressful situation. Becky quickened her steps as she tried to leave the platform in a hurry, but to no avail because Becky saw that the man was walking behind her every time she looked over her shoulder. After making it around 4 blocks of houses, the man was still there. He kept following her and stayed approximately 100 feet behind her, never coming closer but always matching her speed. What does he want from me? Becky took a deep breath and started running as fast as she could. With the man gone from view, she made it to her apartment. Was she finally safe now? Becky seemed to think so. Her apartment was the safest place to be, she thought. It had a door that could be locked, and when she closed the curtains to the outside world, it was like she was in her own safe nest. After Becky locked herself inside her apartment, she dimmed most of the lights so it looked like no one was home. But all her efforts turned out to be in vain. The nervous woman walked up to her window and peeked through the small gap that was left in the curtains. And when she did, she immediately regretted her decision. Because right across the street from her apartment, she saw the man again. He was just standing there, staring up at her home. Becky released a small sigh out of pure fright and immediately grabbed her phone. She needed to call the police. The phone rang, and after about 30 seconds, a police operator appeared on the other end of the line. Becky's voice was panicky, and the operator tried calming the scared woman down. After he managed to do that, Becky explained her dire situation. She talked about her encounters in the metro and explained how everything led her to this very call. The police officer understood and promised to send someone over. Becky placed her phone on the dining room table when the call ended. The fact that police officers were on their way gave Becky a sense of relief. The operator said that it would take about 15 minutes for the police to get there, but the man appeared to be gone when she peeked out the window after 10 minutes. The wait for the police was nerve-wracking, especially with the man across the street being gone. So when the doorbell finally rang after 15 minutes on the dot, Becky ran toward her apartment door. The anxious woman unlocked all the hinges that kept the door closed and turned the key counterclockwise. But when the door to her home flew open, Becky was left in shock because it was not the police who stood there. Becky's heart skipped a beat, and not in a good way because she suddenly looked into the eyes of the strange man again. He didn't leave but had made his way up to her apartment somehow. Becky stood frozen in place and did not know how to react. The man did not do anything, he just stood there silently. But when Becky finally broke free from her fearful trance and started closing the door, he made a move. The man placed his left foot between the door and the doorpost, preventing the apartment door from slamming all the way shut. And that's when he broke the silence and spoke, "Please listen to me. I desperately need your help." Becky looked at the man in utter confusion. But now that he finally spoke in a soft voice, it calmed Becky down somehow. "Why did you follow me?" Becky asked with a shaky voice. The man had eyes filled with tears as he continued to speak. I can't explain in words why I'm here. I can only tell you that it's essential that you help me. Please, Becky, you have to trust me." The man's words took Becky aback. And not only because he was asking desperately for her help. What caught her by surprise the most was that this complete stranger knew her by name. Becky stared into the stranger's eyes and asked him how he knew who she was. "Sorry, mister, but all of this is really freaking me out." The stranger understood her reservations but asked again to trust him. She agreed to trust him, and the man asked her to follow him as a response. Becky agreed to the man's offer and grabbed her coat while he waited at the door opening. They left the building together and walked down the streets. During their walk, the man revealed that his name was David, and he also said that the two of them had met in person before. When David revealed this fact, Becky looked up at the man in confusion. She didn't remember ever seeing his face before, so this revelation surprised her. Becky was captivated by David and asked him where this previous meetup occurred. David smiled friendly when she asked her question and explained that they first met in the hospital where Becky worked as a nurse. "I came in for an appointment a couple of weeks ago." David explained that Becky was the nurse who had helped him in the hospital. He came in sad and fearful, and while all other staff members seemed to treat him like a number, Becky was the only one who was friendly and helpful. "And that's why I followed you. When I saw you in the metro, I knew you were the only one who could help me. I don't know who else to turn to." Becky scratched her head as she tried to focus on David's face, and then a light went off inside of her. She found the moment in the back of her mind. "I remember now, but you were not in the hospital for yourself, were you?" Becky stated. David smiled, but the young nurse also saw that tears were swelling up in his eyes again. This was clearly an emotional question for him, she could tell. "I wasn't the one who needed medical attention back then. And I am not the one who needs your help right now." David stopped when they arrived at an old townhome. David opened the door to the home and invited Becky to step inside. For a moment, the young nurse hesitated, but right before her heart rate shot up again, a voice was heard from inside the house. "David, is that you, my boy?" The voice that came from within the home was the sole reason he followed Becky and the only reason she was at his place right now. She agreed to come inside and stepped over the threshold. The house was very minimal, but when she entered the living room, she saw an elderly man. The old man lay in a worn-down hospital bed. Becky recognized it from her earlier years in intensive care. The man was pale like a corpse and was shaking immensely. It was a sad sight, even for a nurse who saw many sick people daily. "Who is this lovely girl?" David, the old man asked. "Dad, don't push yourself. I will help you." While David lifted his father, he also introduced Becky. He explained that she was from the hospital and she was here to help. Becky looked at the duo with pain in her heart. "Hello, Mr. Yes, my name is Becky, but I'm not sure yet how I can help you." David then explained that his father had a rare condition that implicated his mobility and vital organ functions. It got progressively worse over the last 12 months, and they visited many hospitals because of it. But there was a problem. Even though David's father desperately needed help, and most hospitals agreed to meet with them, the visits always seemed to stop after that first initial visit. The old man needed very expensive and highly experimental treatment for his illness, and since both David's and his father's insurance didn't cover the procedure, they were always sent home with negative news. David saw his father's condition worsen every day. David said there was only one bright light in that entire year, and apparently it was Becky. "You were the only one who was generally concerned and interested in my father." Becky looked at the frail old man with a worried look. She found their story to be extremely sad, but she was lost on how to help in their situation. David grabbed Becky's hand and begged her to take another look into his case. Maybe there was something else she could do. This was all getting too much for the young nurse. Just a few moments ago, she feared for her life while running from a stranger. And now she was in the house of that same man, getting the request to save his dying father's life. Becky broke down in tears and agreed that the healthcare system failed this poor old man. "I can't guarantee anything, but I will see what I can do," Becky stated. Becky went home after that statement, and the very same evening, she hung on the phone with her best friend and colleague, Monica. The much older nurse had worked in the hospital for years and knew all the ins and outs of the place. Becky was already expecting negative news from her friend but wanted to try anyway. After that, she called some other hospital staff members but got the same disappointing response every time. The only thing Becky could now do was hope for a miracle. The young nurse felt guilty for not being able to help David's father. So to make up for it, she went by every day to provide daily pain relief. It was the only thing she could do for the poor old man, because Becky knew that outside help wasn't coming. The young nurse took painkillers home from work and gave them to David's father daily. When Becky rang David's doorbell, she expected a sad face. But when David opened up and saw Becky, he was all smiles. Clearly, he had information she was unaware of, and Becky wanted to know what it was. "What is going on, David? Why are you smiling?" the curious nurse asked. David explained to Becky that his father was selected for the special treatment that could save his life, the one he was rejected from by multiple hospitals. But how is this possible? Because after she hung up the phone with her colleagues, the story spread like wildfire. Staff members told other people, and eventually the story made its way to the newspaper. And as if by a miracle, that call-out worked. Just this morning, we received an email from a wealthy donor who is willing to help my father with the treatment. He doesn't want anything in return. He was just simply moved by our story." And afterward, he hugged Becky once more. Shortly after Becky's visit, David's father's treatment commenced. David's father recovered quickly and effortlessly from his surgery. And with the new experimental medicine trial and excellent care from Becky, he felt better in no time. After about a month, Becky only needed to stop by once a week to give the old man his injection. And every time she came by, she saw major improvements. So much so that after the 6 months were up, Becky's help was no longer required. The happy and satisfied nurse did come by every once in a while though. But when she did, she wore her casual clothes. Becky had become great friends with both men during her time of care and loved coming over for coffee and a chat. David and his father were always happy to see her, because she was their friend and savior. None of this would have happened if Becky had not trusted a stranger.